Hello, hey, I'm glad that you joined us today. It is so good to have you, and I'm glad you're gathered with a group of friends or with your family, or if you're watching this alone, that maybe you'll watch it and then invite some others to watch it with you. Have you ever had an argument with your mom? I mean, when you were growing up, you had a little argument with her, you were kind of maybe in trouble, or you're trying to get yourself out of something, and you just broke into this argument with your mom, and that never really went well. Because somewhere along the line, she played her trump card. And her trump card was something like this: because God gave you parents for a reason. Or because I'm your mother, that's why. There was some kind of trump card that she could always throw down, and argument is basically over. Hey, I want us to think today a little bit about parenting and about kids. Now, some of you who are watching don't have children of your own, but you are surrounded by parents and kids. Some of us are grandparents, and we have our children that are now raising kids. Some of us just live in a neighborhood, and the people 2 doors down have kids. And there are some things that I want us to look at from the Scripture that I believe especially speaks to parents today. But I got to say, it speaks to all of us, because when I walk through Walmart and I act and live in a certain way, there are kids in that place that watch me, that see me, and that visual could change their life. And I know that sounds crazy, but just listen a little bit this morning. I want to start off and read from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 to 6. God is giving some instruction to the children of Israel. He says, "These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess." This is Moses talking to the children of Israel. "So that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may live long life on the earth. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Teach them to your children while you're rising up, when you're laying down, or when you're walking along the way." It's been the role of parents for every generation. God's given us 2 things that he wants us to keep in mind. He wants us to love him and to teach our children to do the same thing. He wants us to know him and to teach kids to trust God and obey his commandments. And generations have struggled with that. Because as parents, let's face it, we deal with stubbornness and rebelliousness, unfaithfulness to God, and we participate in some of that ourselves. And sometimes we ourselves haven't really trusted in the commandments of God, and it's hard to pass on something that we don't embrace ourselves. Children are a blessing from God. He tells us that in his word. He tells us that they are a reward from God's hand. Jesus himself blessed the children. It's a way for our generation to honestly look into the future and have impact on the future generations. But I don't know if you've listened to the culture lately. If you've listened to what the culture says about children and to the parents of children. You see, I think we're supposed to teach our children, but the culture seems to teach us to give our children their every wish and then try to teach them. And I think we're supposed to guide our children, but the culture seems to teach us to glorify our children and then try to guide them. And I think we're supposed to wean our children. They're supposed to launch out of our home, but the culture seems to tell us to worship our children and to then try to launch our children. And it's been happening for many years. But over the last 40 at least that I've experienced, that kids have now become kind of in charge. They're on the throne and they rule. There is a professor at Harvard University, his name is Robert Coles, and he wrote a book called The Spiritual Life of Children. And what he discovered is that over time, as time has passed, the spiritual life, the spiritual integrity, the spiritual heart of children has diminished over time. That their hunger for God has become less today than it was maybe 20, 30, 40, or 50 years ago. If we read the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 3 gives us 3 warning signs for the decline of a nation. Listen to these. Warning sign number 1, your nation is in decline when you have weak and absent men. Think about that in the spiritual world. Secondly, your nation is in decline when there are haughty and covetous women. But here's the third thing. Your nation is in decline when kids are in charge. And I got to tell you, I see that all around me, that kids rule the day. They are in charge. We are tired, we are busy, and we are worn out. And we allow our kids to run the show. Instead of realizing that God has taught us to teach our children to trust the Lord and obey His commandments. And it's very hard to teach children who are in control of our homes. You know, the Scripture calls us to become like children. It calls us to be open and to be transparent, to be loyal, to be available. But it also warns us against childlikeness or childishness, acting like children, being foolish or selfish or rebellious. And our culture has a very hard time making a distinction between being childlike and being acting like a child, have childishness in our life. Some of you probably remember the movie Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump's mom wanted to get him in a special school, and she would do anything to get him in that school. And the world says that we live in, if there's any advantage that can be gained for our kids, go for it. Do whatever it takes. If we have to pay money to get a better SAT, pay the money. We've seen that recently. If we have to move them to get them on a better soccer team, then move across town to get them on a better soccer team. Whatever it takes, do that for our kids. You know, that wouldn't be as much of a concern if it was just in the world, but it's crept into the church and into God's people. The church today can't plan anything without saying, hey, what are we going to do with our kids? It's not like the kids couldn't come sit with us and be a part of what we're doing. We have to plan something for them. Or we, sell church with the kids program, with the ball pit, with big slides, because we want people to be attracted, because we know that the most important thing in their life is keeping their kids happy, in charge. You know, children don't get to see very often their parents worship on a regular basis. Children don't get to see very much their parents equipping and holding them accountable to things. And children don't really get taught too much by their parents about the things of God. So what do we do about that? In a culture where kids rule and we're not having a whole lot of time to know God because we're taking care of them. And we're definitely not teaching them to love God with all of their heart because we're trying to make them happy. Well, I ran into a pastor a few years ago. His name was Roger Thompson. And Roger was asking some questions to parents that I found very intriguing. And it was about the time that my children were growing up and they were living in my home, and I was trying to pour my spiritual life into them. And these were some questions that I began to wrestle with. I want to share them with you this morning. The first one is this: do I allow my children to limit my relationship to God or to limit my ministry? Hey, what's the best part of the day for you? For me, it's the morning. I love mornings. I love getting up really early in the morning while it's still dark. I feel refreshed in the morning. I feel like I can pretty much do anything in the morning. And you have a time of day like that. It might not be the morning for you. But I just have this weird feeling that the best part of our day we should give to God. The best part of our day is the day that I want to walk with God and I want to talk with Him and I want to energize myself to be the man that He wants me to be. And so in the morning, do my kids cut into that time? Do I have to run around getting them ready that I can't take the time to spend with God? You say, well, Scott, of course you do. We got to get them to school. We got to get them to the bus stop. We got to pack their lunches. We got to get them dressed. I get it. I had to do that too. So what I had to do was get up a couple hours earlier in the morning so that I could spend that time with God, because the morning was the best part of my day. You see, the question is, do we allow our children to limit our relationship with God or to cut into our ministry? And kids, if you're watching today, I want to say this to you. Encourage your parents' relationship with God. Ask them questions about their faith. And maybe even say, you know what? I'll ride the bus. So you can spend that time alone with God this morning. Here's a second question. Do my children see the church? We've got to make sure we're defining that properly, okay? We'll do it in a minute. Do my children see the church as their primary community? Hey, we made very clear over the last couple months that the church is not the building, the church is the people that you're gathered with right now. Some of you might be watching this on your own. I want to encourage you to gather with some people that are believing and seeking Jesus. That is the church, the family of God. And do my children see that as my primary community? Do they see a hunger in me, a desire to gather with that church above all else? It's more important than going on a vacation, than going away for a resort day, for going away someplace. Do they see that the number one thing on my calendar this week is to gather with the family of God? Some parents say, well, it's so hard because my kids didn't really want to come. That's the point. Do they rule or do they follow you? There's all kinds of community out there. We have community on soccer teams, on hockey teams, other kind of groups. But there's no greater community than the family of God. And do my kids see that as our primary community each and every weekday, whenever it might be? The third question was this: how much of my children's lifestyle is bought with the Lord's portion? We want to give our kids a lot. We want to help our kids a lot. We want to put them in different activities, different things. I remember when my daughter was little, she took ice skating lessons. And I didn't have enough money to pay for ice skating lessons. Back then, ice skating lessons were like making another car payment. You had to pay for outfits that were several $100s. She'd feed her growing new ice skates all the time, $200 and $300. And I didn't have that kind of money. Or let me say, I did have that kind of money if I wouldn't have given my tithe to the church. And so what was I going to do? I either had to tell my daughter she couldn't ice skate, I had to stop giving the tithe to the church so I could pay for it, or I chose a third option. I went and I got a part-time job. I cleaned bathrooms in drugstores. I sold Christmas trees. I did whatever I had to do to make the payment for her to take ice skating. And then I'd come home and I'd prepare my message and I'd go to church and I'd speak and I'd preach because that was my job. But I had to do some more so she could take ice skating. You know, those kind of things are things that we have to do if we're not going to use the Lord's portion to pay for our children's activities. It's a tough question, but I think our kids need to know that this is the portion that God has asked us to give. This is the portion we give. That's part of our teaching, part of our training. I've shared with you many times when I was little, there were 5 envelopes in my mom's dresser drawer. And the first envelope was tithe. And every week that I got my allowance, I went in and I had to put 10% in that tithe envelope. It was how they taught me about money. And that's the reason why I'm not patting myself on the back that I went out and got other jobs, because I had been taught, it had been drilled in my head that you don't use the Lord's portion for something else than what He's called us to use it for. So do my kids see that? And kids, if you're watching, I hope that you realize and I hope that you tell your parents, hey, you can't have everything that you want. Number 2, you probably could have more than you have if your parents took God's portion and spent it on you. But I also want to tell you to ask your parents to teach you about giving, about saving, those kind of things, and your life will be tremendously different as you grow older. Well, there's a fourth question, and that's this. Do I fear the disapproval of my kids more than God? Do I fear my kids telling me they're unhappy, them pouting, them complaining because they don't have certain things, more than I fear walking in a manner that God has asked me not to walk in? You know, I don't think there's anything more daunting to me than standing before God one day, giving an account for my life, and realize that I've wasted part of it. That's something I don't want to do. I kind of fear God. I'm not afraid of Him, but I fear Him in a healthy way. And I want to do what He wants me to do. I'm not perfect. I've failed in so many ways, and I've shared every one of them with you, most likely. But do we fear the disapproval of our children more than we fear God? And kids, if you're watching, I want you to, again, to encourage your parents' walk with God. Don't manipulate. You know how to do that. You're good at it. But don't do it anymore. Don't be angry when things don't go your way. Realize that your parents aren't perfect, but they're trying to seek God and do the very best that they can. And join them in that. And be able to talk about things when you're uncomfortable and when things aren't going well. And understand together what walking with Jesus is all about. You know, my dad passed away several years ago. And my mom lives with us. And I'm grateful for the things that my mom has taught me, and my mom and dad taught me. There's a little plaque that hangs in my mom's hallway. It's called The Tribute, and it's a tribute to my mom and dad. I wrote it many years ago. I read it in church. We gave it to them in church many, many years ago. And it basically describes the thankfulness that I have in my heart for the way that they lived their lives. Because I got to tell you that my parents didn't allow my brother and I to get in the way of their walk with God. I might not have understood all of that when I was younger, but I'm grateful for it today. Secondly, there was no question in our family that the church was the primary community in our lives. Third, I knew for sure that there were kids around me that had more than I did. I wasn't in want. I wasn't hungry. But there's certain things I didn't have because my parents were faithful with the Lord's portion. And I truly believe that my parents cared more about what God thought about them than what I thought about them. You know, I want you to think about this morning, and it's not easy to share, and it's probably not easy to hear, especially as parents or as grandparents. And whenever we hear something that's not easy, we usually have one or two reactions. The first one is, it's kind of paralyzing at first, and then it gets irritating. We begin to shut down, and we kind of walk away and just forget it. Or the second reaction is that we kind of become introspective with it. We allow the light of Christ to shine into our life and to reveal in our lives where the dark spots are. And I want you to understand something. When God reveals that there's something not right in your life, when He reveals there's something you need to change. So for example, hey, I've used the Lord's portion for my kids. He's not asking you to go out and try harder. He's not asking you to go out and do more. He's asking you to get more grafted into the vine. He's asking you to trust and rely in Him more. He's asking you to abide in Him more. That's what He's asking you to do. And as you abide in Him, He will flow out of you and produce fruit in you that He desires. I want to thank you for watching today. I hope that your discussion is incredible, and I look forward to seeing you all next Sunday at our corporate worship. We're excited to get together. Go to the website, find out exactly where that is, and we'll see you next Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Have a great week, everyone.